Here we go. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. Yeah, I'm a little too chipper this morning, I guess. But anyways, so here's your next note set. It's actually going to be a combination of two. The bottom of set, I don't know, U.S. expansion set, and then halfway into the next one. That's just the way the note sets are in this section. Is that you have, we're going to talk about the War of 1812 today. So that'll be, excuse me, that's what you're singing, they're trying to sing. So anyways, that's what we're going to have is the War of 1812 today, so we'll talk about that. First of all, some announcements, I suppose. One more time, please try to keep up on your work. I have some people who are mad rushing to turn things in at the last minute when they see they have zeros in the progress book. I am not going to give you full credit on things that are late or super late, because I have some people turn stuff in from the first week. We are now on week 3, so please try to keep up with it if you can. At least for this class, it shouldn't take you any more than a half hour, maybe, each day to work on it. If not, less than that, I suppose. So anyways, so what we're talking about today is the War of 1812. Now, the War of 1812 is significant because this is a war, to me, that I think kind of gets forgotten in U.S. history. And it's relevant to Ohio because, well, a lot of it is fought in and around Ohio. And lastly, it's going on the same time period as expansion is. So that is actually going to be important in all the things that we do as well. So to recap, we already talked about expansion, especially Louisiana Purchase the other day, in Lewis and Clark. And so amidst all of this, when we're trying to make the country larger and push out west, is you have this War of 1812, which you want to call U.S. versus Britain Part 2, or version 2.0. When after the American Revolution, England was still hanging around. They still had entities, especially in Canada, and they were still a little bit chafed just because they lost to us in the first place. And so they wanted to have a second match, I suppose, or rematch to try and get their heavyweight title back. In the end, it's not going to work out too well for them, but for a while, it actually does. So what we'll talk about here is what does happen between these two groups. First of all, the main causes of the War of 1812. Now, this isn't one that we just jumped into right away. This is one that was kind of building over time because the Native Americans were being helped by the British here. It's the old story of, I think it's Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, where he's told by his granny or his aunt or someone to paint the fence, or whitewash as they call it back in the day, and didn't want to do it because it was just boring work. And so he conned somebody else into doing his work for him by telling them how awesome it actually was. And then his friends ended up doing it, and he could sit off the side and kind of just take a nap. Well, in essence, this is what's going on in the War of 1812, at least for the causes, that England has these Native Americans who still hate the colonists, still hate the Americans. And so if you can find someone to do your dirty work for you for relatively cheap, then I guess that's the route that you go. And in this case, what they did is they armed them. So giving them weapons to end up fighting against a common enemy. It's the old saying, and I've said this in class before, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So in this case, that's what does happen, is they arm the Native Americans. But also your colonists, your Americans, your settlers, they wanted to push up north. They saw all this land in Canada, which is still growing itself, and the threat of Britain up there is they decided that they wanted to conquer Canada themselves. And so there was that opportunity in this war if they could take out Canada. And then thirdly, Britain was doing what was called impressment. John Green talked about this in a previous video, is that they were seizing U.S. ships and taking former British sailors. Now, War of 1812 is not that far away from the American Revolution. So after the American Revolution is over, a lot of these British soldiers end up turning sides and becoming Americans and working on American ships. And Britain doesn't like that. So when they stop these ships on the open seas, and almost like pirates, and take the cargo, they also take British sailors from them. People that they thought or they knew were British at one point, now working for the Americans, they ended up taking them off of those ships. And this becomes problematic because, you know, how do you know exactly who was British? I mean, you could say, well, they speak British. It's not exactly how that works. Um, and they really were just taking anybody. So you could just say they're kidnapping them, or as the proper term is here, is impressment. We're taking their sailors away from them. And then the fourth reason for this is they were being bad English themselves, is they blocked the U.S. trade routes on the Atlantic. So you've got problems really on all sides. You've got out west, you've got the Native Americans. To the north, you've got the British in Canada. And to your east on the ocean, on the Atlantic, you've got the British there again, blockading things in those trade routes. So other issues that we had at the time period. So obviously we have that expansion going on. We owe some countries money. We've just spent a pile of money for that land out west to the French. And so June 1812, President James Madison and Congress ended up declaring war as what would be dubbed as Mr. Madison's War here. Not everybody was in favor of it. Now, this is the way to go. Madison wants a war. Congress declares war. But when you voted for it, it wasn't overwhelming like you've seen, or we'll talk about some other cases. In this case, Ohio's 2 senators, remember every state has 2 senators, Thomas Worthington and I think what Campbell's first name is, but they both voted against the war. So it's not obviously unanimous. You have some people who want it, you have some people who don't. And the big reasoning for them not wanting it is they thought that the U.S. was weak at the time period. And I guess you guys can decide on that yourselves on what you think. We're just coming out of a war. And again, it's like 25-ish years prior. We're just coming out of one. We're still owing a lot of people money. We're expanding or trying to expand. So we've kind of got our hand in too many cookie jars, if you want to use that analogy or whatever. But when you look at the statistics of it, we weren't really ready for war overall. We had a small Navy. We really had no purpose to have a gigantic Navy because we weren't having too many issues in the ocean. In terms of a permanent Navy, if you're looking at it like naval boats to fight, we only had 16 ships. On the other side of it, Britain had 135. And we only had 7,000 men in our standing army. So somebody kind of dropped the, I'm forgetting what the little saying is. But anyways, they dropped the ball. That's it, doy. They dropped the ball in this case because they should have had something better than a standing army of 7,000. We should have realized in the American Revolution that we really needed more people for that. And 16 ships, that's really not that many for as big of a coastline as we had at the time period. So Britain's got a leg up there, and we also have old officers. Most of our officers fought in the Revolutionary War at the time period. And so let's do some math. If you're saying that those officers were 25 during the Revolutionary War, and you're roughly 30 years later, they're now into their 50s. And no offense to anybody who's that age, I'm not there myself. Cough, cough, Mr. Fade. Mr. Anderson looks like it. But those people might not be what you want in war. Technology changes, strategy changes, and if we're stuck in what used to be and we're fighting in a war currently, that could be problematic for us. So I always like that one too. Yes, I remember old phones like that, and your parents probably do too back in the day. So anyways, we were forced to, I don't know, my thing's not coming up here. The last point on this should be, we were forced to use state militias. In other words, we're going back to what we had before, and they were unprepared men. That should be your note set. I don't know why this is not loading. All right, so I'm still going to keep talking here, and I'm going to drop. There it is. I don't know why it didn't. You can see it now, but it wouldn't pop up from there. Forced to use state militias or unprepared men. So let's keep going here. We'll do about halfway on this note set. So we used to spend, a couple of days talking about this War of 1812, but they really don't mention it much in your book anymore, and it's not in your Ohio State standards, but I like to talk about some of it because you have some relevant pieces at the time period, especially because plus a lot of it's in Ohio or the outskirts of Ohio, more importantly, in Lake Erie. Some of you have been to this is Admiral Perry's monument in Put-in-Bay. If you've ever been there, get your little golf cart, you can ride to it and around it and everything else. You guys should go up and see it and wave to the Canadians on the other side. Not that I'm sure if they're waving back or not, but this was both a ground and a naval battle for the United States. And some key things happen for us that are going to be relevant that you can actually tie into other wars as well. On the Native American front, you had their hero was a guy named Tecumseh, who was an Ohioan. His name means panther across the sky. When he was born, supposedly there was a comet going across the sky, and then people thought that he would do great things for the Shawnee Indians, and well, they were actually right because he was a famous war chief for them. So he ends up trying to rally some southern Indian groups. You have your Seminoles and your Creek and your Chippewa down in Florida. He's trying to rally them to come up and kind of conform this whole Indian Confederacy and help out the Native Americans against the colonists, against the whites. And they didn't end up coming up. So in the end, what happened is his brother, who was named Tenskwatawa, who was called the Prophet, ended up leading a battle against William Henry Harrison in Indiana and failing miserably. And so the Native Americans kind of just had to keep pressing forward and doing the best they could. But it becomes problematic for them when Tecumseh himself, their leader, is killed at Battle of Thames in Canada. And things really start to fall apart for the English because once Tecumseh falls, then the Native Americans themselves really fall as well. And to put this in a more modern perspective, if you look at the World War II, you had Germany, Italy, and Japan. And when Japan pushed us to get into the war, and that would be at Pearl Harbor, well, we come back at them and drop the 2 atom bombs on them, Fat Man and Little Boy, at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They end up dropping out like instantly. They're like, we're done. We're not going to fight anymore. And so that becomes a problem for Germany because now one of their major allies, especially on the Pacific side of things, is now out. So this is going to be the same thing for the British here, that once the Native Americans are out, they themselves start to lose momentum for their own cause, and they start to lose their land at the same time due to all these treaties that are going to pop up, like Treaty of Greenville, where they lose a lot of their land in Ohio. They actually get pushed up into the, which would be the Great Black Swamp by the Toledo region, and then we end up pushing them out towards Indiana and even further out west. Because they've lost Tecumseh, they've lost their momentum, and they're basically done in this fight. So Britain tries to press this attack, and they actually end up attacking Washington, D.C., and they burn down the White House. They burned down the White House, they burned down the Library of Congress, which is where most of your books were at the time period. And Washington really takes a big hit. So here it's Britain coming in at our major headquarters, our main city, and burning things to the ground. Now, you do have some heroes at this time period. One of the heroes here is Dolly Madison, and no, not the lady who makes the cupcakes, but Dolly Madison, who was James Madison's wife. She's the first lady of the time period. She's actually credited for running back into the White House and saving many papers and pictures from the fire, and a lot of those are still on display in the White House today. So saving a lot of important things at that time period. And the British also attacked. There's those Dolly Madison donuts as well. The zingers to the bomb. But anyways, Tommy's starting to rumble. Okay, they also attack, which is not too far away from Washington, D.C., Baltimore's Fort McHenry, which you look there, there's an overhead view of it, of what it looks like in modern times, because they redid it. Right there off of the coast. Baltimore's a really pretty place. If you ever get a chance to go to Baltimore Harbor, you're like, hey, it looks like a turtle there. Not quite. I guess it kind of does. But that's how their forts were made at the time period. If you want to see a good one for the United States, you go up to Harrisburg, go to Fort Meigs. That's a pretty cool fort. It's very similar in make and style to this one here. So anyways, a hero comes from this battle at Fort McHenry. So Fort McHenry is just getting hammered by the British, and on the outskirts of this fort, and you can kind of see this in the background here with this little flag, is you see there's this guy standing up on this boat, and this guy was a poet. His name was Francis Scott Key. And from this battle, he ends up watching the battle and seeing how the flag was still there as the fort was getting hammered by rockets, and the rockets' red glare, and that through it all, the flag was still there. So this is where we get our Star Spangled Banner today, is from this poem from Francis Scott Key, which ends up becoming the national anthem much later. This isn't a song right away. I have to actually take a second here. I'm writing in my notes. Yeah, I'm going to have you look at some songs for tomorrow, because that was a fun thing in during classes. We would listen to good, maybe not so good, national anthem versions. But anyways, to cut this short, we have other heroes, but thanks Ohio State Standards for shortening it for us. But the British end up losing. So the Treaty of Ghent gets signed in Belgium on Christmas Eve of 1814. Now, in short, how do we end up winning? Well, we end up winning the naval battles. We end up building up, because of Oliver Hazard Perry, who that Perry Monument is to on Put Bay. We end up winning the Battle of Lake Erie. We also end up building up a naval force on the Atlantic coast, and then pushing the British out of the land coastal areas like Washington, D.C. at the same time. So because of us kind of getting on the ball a little bit faster, we're able to knock them out one more time. And at the end of any good war, you always sign this treaty. So that's what this is, the Treaty of Ghent. Signed on Christmas Eve of 1814. However, it's really slow to get out because there's no treaty, there's no Twitter, there's no YouTube, there's no news networks to really send this out. So technically it ends on Christmas Eve of 1814. We still have some battles going on afterwards, because people don't get news that this battle or this war is actually over. And in this case, a hero is born during this time period, is Andrew Jackson, who will later become president of the United States, kind of a notorious president of the United States in terms of how he treated Native Americans and other people. But at this time, he was a hero because he helped to defeat the British at the Battle of New Orleans, or New Orleans, depending on who you are, January of 1815. Now, New Orleans was a major port city at the time period, was originally held by the French. Now it's an American city, and the British tried to take this. Well, now Andrew Jackson ends up becoming this big hero, even after the war is over, defeating the British there, and he'll carry that on to later become president of the United States. And we'll talk about some of his dealings in the next note set, especially with the Trail of Tears for the Native Americans. So at this point, we've defeated Britain again. They don't get a third chance. We've knocked them out twice. And so the main results from this is really why this note set's important. Because we don't really have anybody standing in our way anymore, we're able to do some things to push the United States forward. And in terms of that, it would be land expansion. That's the big thing. And nobody else is there. The British, the Native Americans are gone. We bought the French up. We do have to deal with the Spanish, and we'll fight them and buy them out, depending on the cases here. But it's a new era of confidence for the United States. We have beaten Britain again. There's nobody else to really stand in our way except ourselves. So we do have a little bit of overconfidence here, maybe like this cat, this eagle here. Probably not going to end well for the cat, we'll say. And here's another cat. What is it about cats? All cocky things. But we are able to get these new lands because of it. You could say we acquired them. In other words, we signed some treaties with the Native Americans, which for the most part gave them a little bit of things and then kicked them off of their land. And then just moved them out west further and further, as I said. And it paved the way for the expansion of American democracy. That's very pie in the sky-ish, but that, I mean, that's it. That's the importance of the War of 1812, besides some of your heroes that you have at the time period and how it reflected on the United States in terms of being able to expand. And so that's what we're able to do, not just land expansion, but of American democracy too. So the goal is really to get, between today and the next note set, is to get from sea to shining sea. And we're going to be able to accomplish that through Oh, what's the way that I say it? We buy it, or we bought it, or we fought it. That's the way. We bought it, or we fought it. And really should be fought for, but I don't care. I'm not in English. So thanks for sticking with this note set. Hopefully it wasn't awful. We'll talk about some of the specific land areas that we gained through the bought and the fought idea, and we'll spread that American democracy. Hoorah. All right, have a good day, and be productive.